Joining us about this time, and she joins us now to talk about issues of the week. Former ACT MP, City Councillor, Regional Councillor, lawyer, businesswoman, Hilary Calvert joins us. Hilary, it's an interesting decision by the Supreme Court, isn't it?
I haven't been on it, so remind me.
The Supreme Court have just ruled that they are overturning a verdict of the Court of Appeal, and that they are reinstating the civil suit of Mike Smith, Maori activist, who is bringing a suit for damages, presumably, and an injunction he is seeking for 7 of New Zealand's top companies, including Fonterra, Genesis, and 5 others. I can't remember, a couple of dairy companies in there, to immediately reduce their emissions because their emissions are harming his people.
Goodness me.
I know.
Hard to know where to go with that, isn't it?
Well,
apart from what you've just been saying about them being an activist, it just reminds you that what we used to have in the way of had a top court, which was the Privy Council. The reason we had the Privy Council was that we weren't big and grown up enough to be sure we wanted a court in New Zealand. So we, when all the argy-bargy had finished happening, people could, in some instances, go after the Privy Council, of course based in London, and say, really though? And the Privy Council would look at the actual law, and it would make decisions based on actual law. And we then decided that, no, we were big and grown up enough to make these decisions within New Zealand, and this is evidence that we're not.
Absolutely. Well, the other interesting thing is, of course, and the real embarrassment for New Zealand judiciary was to do with both the Lundy case and to do with the Bain case, that their verdicts, which had been held pretty much unanimously, were overturned by the... weren't they?
Yes, I just think that we're not. We'd have been better, actually, to move from an English Privy Council to have a top court that was limited international, a top court that provided top court stuff for Australia, Fiji, New Zealand, whatever, or some Commonwealth countries, Canada. So to keep some semblance of distance, because courts are supposed to be administering the law as it stands. So if they were doing that, the fact that they were in Australia or somewhere else wouldn't make any difference to anybody if we trusted them and relied on them. It would have been better to have an international court to replace the one that was just from British origin, I think.
Yes. That said, I think there was an idea, wasn't there, when we were debating this as a country. It was, of course, a decision that was made. When was that decision made? I'm just trying to remember which government made it. Was it the Labour government or the National government that made the decision?
I'm guessing Labour, but I don't know.
Well, certainly National didn't overturn it. So, I mean, It's as is usually the way. The Labour comes in and rearranges the furniture and changes the whole shop, and National just comes in and does a bit of window dressing at the front and says, yeah, everything's fine. But on that issue, the Supreme Court or New Zealand's Court of Appeal, you might argue, started this whole reanimation.
The Supreme Court is above the Court of Appeal.
Yeah, but I'm saying the Court of Appeal back... So the Supreme Court didn't come in until the 90s, I think. It was the Court of Appeal that in New Zealand that reanimated the treaty and gave it that word partnership. I see David Seymour was saying this morning that he said the Supreme Court didn't say it was a partnership. He said it was akin to a partnership. Does that strike you as being particularly contributory or not?
Yes, and I'm really enjoying the fact that we can now not only are we allowed to speak of what the treaty means, but it's a proper topic of conversation, which is really good, isn't it?
Well, you're saying why? It was excluded from it before because people just didn't want to talk about it?
Every time anybody mentioned it. No, not because they didn't want to talk about it. Every time anybody mentioned it, somebody just would stand up and say, racist. And we weren't allowed to talk about it. And now, although some people are still saying it's not for you to decide, it's for Maori to decide, it's a proper topic. And I think the government, you could say that the government has lost the rhetoric at the moment because David Seymour's got in Winston Peters before that. Or you can say this is a good time for the government to be working away, figuring out what to do with health and money and things like that, while people are concentrating on treaty issues.
Yes, it's interesting. Well, I was just talking to Dr. Nina Hood prior to 12 o'clock and talking about how education's disappeared off the media radar for the last 4 months. There was a minor bit about cell phones being banned from schools, and that's about it. And I was saying that, but in actual fact, when I look back, there've been a number of education issues and releases from the Minister of Education since the election, which have not been covered or covered so severely inadequately that I've got that perception. That the treaty issue has obliterated all other media, hasn't it, for the first 5 weeks or 6 weeks of this year?
Yes. And yet it's not, it's complete pro-division, if you're thinking of who is causing racism in New Zealand, the mainstream media is right in there in the frame. They're looking for, I thought over the 4 days of Waitangi, it was actually reasonably mild. I mean, Maori speaking Maori, calling other people insects, well, that's, probably par for the course for all I know. But it was fairly mild, but the media was desperate to say there was this big, dreadful thing happening. And it was left with the pathetic, there was a lot of people involved. And interviewing Maori who were saying, our people are upset. There isn't an our people. There's not a Pan Maori. There's a whole lot of different people. And you could hear, and we're beginning to hear, which is good, Maori who think they want to work with the government of the day, distancing themselves just quietly from the rest of them. And people saying the Maori Party doesn't speak for us, for example. So I'm liking it all. The Privy Council came in 2004, I think, just incidentally.
I'm glad you've mentioned that, because the thing that struck me over the weekend was there isn't a Maori voice. There's a whole series of European commentators and TVNZ commentators, Maori on TVNZ, saying there's a unified Maori voice on this. But there's not, is there? Because as you've just pointed out, if there was a unified Maori voice, you like the treaty. We've got that. But the treaty's not at threat here. The treaty's never been at threat. David Seymour didn't say, I'm going to abolish the treaty, or put to the people, I'm going to abolish the treaty. He just said, what do the principles mean? We need to define that, because it does seem to be a moving mess, and he's right on that one.
And
but just going back on that
unified media voice, which is, and they really need chastising, and their voice is more unified than Maori ever is, and it's stupider, I have to say. The TV3 news that had, I think it was Michael Morra, not sure, dressed in the colours that people were told to come along in black with white flags, or black and white. He was dressed in black. Now, it's unusual for a journalist to wear a black suit and a black shirt. He was walking in solidarity with them, interviewing them, and with this big thing about the size of my cell phone hanging around his neck that looks like it's made of whalebone or something, but has presumably got given it or something. He's a born-again Maori. I mean, I don't even know whether he is Maori, but he's been to Maori language classes and he struggled with them. But he's very proud of himself.
Who's this?
And really, it's cringeworthy. I think it's Mike McRoberts, is it?
Oh, Mike McRoberts. Oh, God. Yeah. He is a born-again Maori. Yes, you're right.
And then you have one of the women journalists, and I ought to know, but I reject them, sort of, saying Christopher Luxon would not be interviewed. He scurried off. And then they spent the next 3 years broadcasting the interview they had with him. I mean, really? I mean, they said, what are you doing? What your speech seemed much the same as last year's, which was fair enough. It was, and they showed why it was. And he said, I looked at it, and those are the things I wanted to say. Presumably the same as what he wanted to say last year. And that's fine. But they spent several minutes interviewing him, having said he would not hang around for an interview. Really? They should be embarrassed. Their mothers should be telling them off.